Welcome to Your Business, Your Life with Matt DiFrancesco, your personal financial technician. Whether you've had years of success in your business or are just starting out, HighLift Financial can help you create a vision for your business, life, and family, and align these for generational wealth. So as they say, what happens in your life affects your business. And now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to Your Business, Your Life with your host, me, Matt DiFrancesco. And as always, I'm joined today with my awesome producer, Eric Johnson. Eric, how you doing today?
My man, I am doing fantastic. Thank you so much for bringing me back on this podcast. I know you've got a fantastic guest today.
Oh, of course I do. And it's interesting. You notice how small the world's getting these days.
Yes, absolutely. Just before we started the podcast, Jennifer, and I were talking, and we're in all three separate locations, but it feels like we're all in the same room.
That's exactly right. And actually, Jennifer's in Bermuda, of all places. As we watch this world get smaller, we're finding more and more people are encountering, whether through their work, their businesses, or their personal relationships, they're starting to cross borders. And what happens, these events and relationships can create financial, tax, and estate complexities that can be really difficult to navigate. So today I want to bring on my guest and also my friend, Jennifer Patterson. Jennifer is the managing partner of Patterson Partners Ltd, which is a firm known for pioneering the emerging specialty of cross-border wealth management and is a leading provider of cross-border family office services. She's also the founder of the Cross-Border Institute, which assists dual nationals and globally mobile people to live an amazing cross-borders lifestyle. And she's also got a book, Financial Planning for Global Living. I want to thank Jennifer for being on the show, and I'm proud to call her a partner of mine. She's helped me and some of my clients navigate some of these difficult issues, and she's also a very dear friend. So, Jennifer, welcome to this podcast.
Hey, Matt. Great to be here. I'm very excited. Looking forward to our chat.
Oh, definitely. So I think we're going to just start right off the bat as I normally do. I remember when we met I believe it was Puerto Rico is where we first met at a conference. And your story, you told me a little bit about your story and how you came to work with expats and dual citizens. And it was fascinating to me. Just wondered if you could share a little bit with the audience your story and how you came into this specialty.
Sure. The short version of the now lifetime story, for the most part, is, in short, I met my husband in university in the United States. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but when I first met him, because his mom is Canadian, he's from Bermuda, which is British, but he had kind of a North American accent. So I remember that when I first met him, I thought it was a line. I was like, "Where are you from?" Because we met on the first day of school. And he's like, "Bermuda." And I was like, "People live there?" So I thought it was really interesting to start with. But anyways, that's kind of what got me here. Was I married a non-US person, and I moved to Bermuda and found, after a couple of years living here, that I was actually what's called an expat. And I had no idea that was even a thing at the time, but I was 23. At first I thought, oh, well, it's just because I'm young, I have no idea. But no, come to find out there's really a lifestyle. And so I was working as a financial planner or wealth manager for a brokerage firm locally. Mm-hmm. And so what was coming in the door was people like me, or that had married non-US people living in overseas. The US rules just kept kind of coming in, and I didn't know what to do, even though I had by this time had the CFP. I also got the SEMA designation. I was taking all these exams, and really just people that were coming in the door, we just didn't have a workflow. We didn't have processes. And I remember thinking, how do you do this? Long story short, I was able to have the client base who had the net worth that we could go get external advisors, tax lawyers, for example. And because of struggling through the issues, we learned on the job, really. And I ended up teaching myself international tax. And that's the sort of long story short, if you will, or the short version of the very, very long story. But in short, it was me. I basically married into it. And my kids, we have 2 kids. They are actually tri-nationals. So because my husband is technically a dual, so they're American, Bermudian, and Canadian. And so you can imagine And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but it's interesting the decision-making process that comes up when you have that much opportunity.
Oh, you're exactly right. And I find it fascinating. I love your book's titled "Financial Planning for Global Living," and I think some people, maybe a lot of people in the audience, will think, "Well, what's the difference? Why isn't just financial planning?" But I know, like, my sister lives in Mexico. Her husband's Mexican, so her kids have dual citizenship, and then they've also gone to foreign schools. One of them went to a German school. One went to a English school. There's all these then complexities. And now they're coming back to the States to go to school, and a couple of them are going back to Mexico. Some of them are staying in the States, and it does create some interesting complexity. So what are some of the why is financial planning different for people that maybe are in this situation of either cross borders or have dual or multi-citizenships?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think over the years we used to think, when we first get started in this, we think that the first complexity level, or that first thing that we want to tackle, is that immediate issue in front of us. But I have to say that over the years, what I've figured out the hard way is one of the most complicated things is this very simple idea that we all refer to as, in air quotes, goals. It's like, what do you want? And the reason that is so hard is because you were just describing with your sister in that family, is there's opportunities, right, that come in front of you. Do I want to go to school here? Do I want to go to school there? How does that impact, frankly, their ability? A lot of people don't even understand this, the ability of that child or young adult later to pass on that citizenship. So remember, just a minute ago, just to take a sidestep, my kids were born outside of the United States, born in Bermuda. And so they are citizens of the U.S. But the rules, immigration rules, are another part of this planning. Because if those kids, again, back to goals, if one of the objectives of my kids, let's use them, is to pass on the U.S. citizenship to their own children, they have to have met the residency requirement in order to do that. They themselves, just because they are a citizen, because of them being born abroad, they may not be able to pass on U.S. citizenship. It's not automatic. So I just have to come back to this thing of, what do you want? This is where we spend more time with people these days, in that beginning part of saying, let's go through what you were really trying to achieve. And then 90% of the time people are saying, well, I can't predict the rest of my life. And we say, well, that's okay. But what if we could just think through what you think you'd like to have? Because we really need to explore that from a non-country specific point of view, and the easiest way to think of it as, like, can we fund them? What are the numbers? Forget where we are at the moment, the actual physical locality. Do we know what the numbers look like, or need to look like, so that we know what we're targeting? And then we'll back into the specifics of the country. So it really comes down to, I think, one of the biggest ones is, what do we want? And getting the clarity around really what we're ultimately trying to achieve, because those opportunities are in front of you or us, and it can get very overwhelming. And then the other thing that happens is, if you just go with the path in front of you and you get, let's say, advice, and this happens quite a bit with people going maybe are not U.S. citizens, they get a work permit or a job in the United States, and they're working for a U.S. company. And then, of course, the advice at the time is, put all your money into the employer plan, the 401k or IRAs, whatever it needs to be. But if they aren't going to be spending the rest of their lives in the United States, should they be putting all that money into that plan? And we can't say yes and we can't say no. I can't say that you should or shouldn't. It's going to be very dependent on kind of, if we can try to forecast where we think we might be ending up. And so ultimately, we're trying to build flexibility into these plans as much as we can.
Well, I would think you would have to, because life is very fluid. And I think, especially if somebody's younger, they don't know who they're going to meet or then how that's going to change their life circumstances. And so I would think you would have to have a certain amount of flexibility with it. And you and I had worked on a case. One of my clients whose partner was Australian and came to this country. She's got the dual citizenship, but she still has assets in Australia. And I would think that this is kind of a common thing that you probably see out there, where you have multinationals that maybe have assets in different countries. What are some of the complexities that arise because of that?
Well, you're going to have what we, in the lingo, is what we call clash of law. So
Right.
It's basically what that means is let's use retirement plans because they're the most common and the most obvious, right, to everybody. And honestly, that's where most of everybody is getting tripped up, is you have money in a retirement plan, let's say in Australia, because you work there or you're a citizen, you live there for a number of years, and the best practice was to contribute to that plan. And then you move to the U.S. or you're dual national and you move back to the U.S. and then you're contributing to the 401k. It's interesting because how the United States sees that plan, the superannuation, is going to affect your U.S. tax return, whether you're drawing on it or not. It's not going to, a lot of people think, oh, these plans are tax deferred in country A, so therefore it must be tax deferred in country B. And that is not necessarily the case. So this is very common, and this also, it's not just tax. The same problem exists with estate planning. So
Right.
your will, or will you have one will that covers worldwide assets? Or are you better off having more than one will, depending on where you have those particular assets, so that you can direct in the sort of the language? No, I don't necessarily mean the actual, I mean, you may have that too. What I mean is if you're in France, then you're going to have your will perhaps in French, covering the French assets, and then you have to work with somebody locally. And that all has to be coordinated because it's very common that all wills will say, this is my last will and testament, and I revoke all previous wills. So you have to make sure that language isn't necessarily there if you have multiple wills. So you can imagine you've got retirement, you have the problems there. We have estate planning, we have the problems there. It just kind of blossoms out. And investing, where if you're a multinational family, and what I mean by that is you have more than one nationality in the family, and perhaps you have decided that you can keep your assets separate for various planning purposes. What I mean by that is, let's say you're not in the United States, you're living outside the United States, and you have one spouse's citizenship of country A and your country B, and you say, okay, let's invest in these types of assets in your name, and then I'll invest in these other assets in my name, and because it's been determined to be best practice or in their best interest that way. But you have to know, you can't start out that way. Do you know what I mean? We have to know why. How did we arrive at knowing which assets to put in which person's name? So all these little areas, it just seems like details, but it's these details that end up causing the biggest problems if they're not addressed up front.
Well, and that's something that I've always been impressed by you, is this, you're not only just your attention to detail, but the processes that you've put in place to kind of help people to navigate this. You kind of touched on it about helping them to set goals. And I know you go into much more detail in your book about this, but I wondered maybe if you could just give the audience an overview of kind of what the process might look like.
Sure. Yeah. The first step really is to, well, particularly in international, we're going to what we call take inventory. So where are all of those assets? What do you actually have? And whose name is it in? And so that would be the financial part of the taking inventory. But then it's what I had alluded to before in terms of this, what do you want? Because it's very much checking in. And also with spouses, different nationalities, one of the things we found is your culture is also going to help dictate a little bit how you view certain topics. And like even on the financial side, the financial. So meaning some people are very attached to real estate because culturally the family would always invest in real estate and it was just safer or whatever the culture tells you. But overcoming that can be difficult in the relationship. So we really need to start with what does each spouse want if it's a relationship, and then where are we overlapping and where are we really trying to go. So that's what we call, so there's that take inventory tied of this idea of life design. How can we design what we really want without regard to the money to start with? Just let's dream a little bit, dare we say it. And then we're really focused on cash flow because we know that how you use your what we call the human capital, right? Our skills, that's how we're going to generate the income. That's all going to tie into cash flow, what we call a tax filter. We've got to look at how are those assets currently and income flowing through tax in the two, if it's two different countries, we need to understand what's going on there, make some decisions, and then ultimately determine how much is being saved, not saved. And then you can imagine you're now into the investment process. And I'd already alluded to parts of who in whose name, that kind of thing. And then lastly, once we kind of have that in place, we're really at this step, what we call protect the plan, which is what it sounds like. It's okay, we have a plan. How do we make sure that if anything goes wrong with what we've laid out, somebody, as we say, gets struck by a bus, how do we know that this is solid? So that's where all that estate planning and the other basics, insurance. And that's the other challenge, just really quickly. Insurance, right? How do you that's why there's an entire industry for what they call expat insurance.
Okay.
Because your insurance may not cover you outside of that one country where it was initiated. So Protect the Plan also has its own, there's complexity everywhere, as you can hear. And it's always these details, honestly. So this is why the process, because we really need to have an idea of where we're trying to, the way I just explained it, the reason I explained it that way is because we can make micro decisions, and it's kind of in the order in which we really need to make those decisions. And in order to make it the most efficient use of time, effort, and frankly, money at that point. Because there's nothing worse than, and I mean, I've experienced this outside of the financial, but you hire consultant A, or and you get out, or maybe even if it's you want to create a renovation for the house, and you start down the path of renovations, then all of a sudden it's like make a change here, make a change there, and then all of a sudden you realize that you've just spent umpteen thousands of dollars for plans, and then you hate it all, and you're just throwing it out the window. So that is possible, very possible, and actually quite common in this space to be aware of. So we really want to make sure that we approach the decision making and the planning process really in the order that I just described it.
Well, exactly. One of the things that's, and this has become more and more popular now, is people retiring to other countries, whether going to Mexico, to the islands, the Caribbean, wherever, Costa Rica, places like that have basically, because the cost of living is lower and they maybe have a simpler lifestyle, those type of things. But I'm sure just from what you're talking about, there's a lot of complexities with that. So if somebody's considering that, what would you recommend they do, like before they, just jump off and move down to Acapulco?
I honestly recommend having, well, we call it a relocation plan. Okay. So really what that means is think about, again, you have to kind of come back to the why am I doing this? What's the main motivator? Is it cash flow? Is it maximizing lifestyle? Is that really what's going on? And then how will your current situation, that current plan, because even if you don't have a written plan, you have a plan, right? It's probably just not written. It's probably in your head, sort of. It's just not organized the way that we might organize it, but it's there. So if you were to kind of move yourself metaphorically to that place without having moved yet, what would change? That is what I like to plan it on paper first, and then you can kind of see on paper how things may or may not change, and you get a lot more insight and clarity And what happens is you can start to see how things are deviating from how it is in your head. We have an idea how things are going to work out. And then you go, oh, I didn't know about this other little thing over here. And you start thinking, oh, crikey, it worked out way better in my head than it is on paper right now. Because usually what we find is, obviously, if you're in a corporate position, the corporate employer is probably moving you. Okay, so you're probably moving first and checking things out later. And that's usually, this is how we've learned to try to back up the process, is there's a lot that happens because that person, that family in that situation, they don't have as much control or perceived control over that move because they've accepted the position. But if you're moving on your own and you're saying, hey, I think I'd like to retire abroad, then I think you have the opportunity to at least run through a sketch of how that looks first. Because there's other little things like you have to advance yourself in time to make sure that, you know, because I think one of the questions, particularly with a retire abroad, is what happens in advanced age? Nobody likes to think about it. We all don't like to think about it anyway. It's just, it's not a sexy topic, but we have to. It's just one of those things. Advanced directives, all of those things are coming in. Long-term care is huge. Again, all topics that we all just disdain, but it's very, very material. I have actually had clients where we had to bring this up because I had a client a long time ago who said, oh, I'm going to move to New Zealand because that's where my son is. And I remember saying, well, if you're going to do it, we need to have a timeline, because she was, I think, 75 at the time.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, no, she had been a client for a long time, and she was getting up in age, and she was, I think we were talking about these things because of, she had no family. She lived here, and she had an only child, and she's a widow, and her son was in New Zealand, which is 30 hours by flying from here. So long story short, she needed to, or they as a family needed to decide what was happening. And I remember, so what ended up happening, she really tried to keep procrastinating on making a decision. And really what ended up happening was, by not making the decision, she ended up having to stay here, because there's a point when you will not be able to relocate your body. It's just too much. And then she ended up, I don't know the exact language, but she ended up with Parkinson's disease. Oh. So she couldn't go. It was going to, but we went through an exercise on she was actually British national. Should she go back to England and stay there long term? Should she stay in Bermuda, or will she end up in New Zealand? And she ended up in Bermuda. Oh. And then we ended up in a long-term care facility here.
Oh boy. Okay.
But you know, so it's, again, these are practical things. It's just, it unfortunately, what brings up all the stuff that we don't want to deal with. And then it also brings up, particularly if you have children, you have to raise it with your children of like, hi, do we know what we're doing when I need help? Because there's the options of some people think, well, I'll just get help in the beginning. I'll just get somebody to help me with basic assisted living, cooking, those basic, but there's that point when you have to go to that next level, and you need to know if that's going to happen in that country, or if you're basically going, quote, home, whatever home is for you, where the children are, something like that. So these other, again, it's back to this, what do we really want? In many cases, it's what don't I want? Sometimes we start with that, and then you back into the actual plan. And this is you and I both know, this is why planning is not a one-time event. It can't be perfect. We're never going to get one plan. It's not a plan and forget, or set and forget. This is a living, breathing, dynamic, flexible. As you have a new idea about something, you have to check in on that overall. It's like businesses have strategic plans. And yes, 10 years ago, we were all still trying to run strategic plans that were kind of a set and forget. And where are we at now? 90 days strategic plans? Or you set out the goals, but you're checking in now on business every 90 days, really. So I think it's reasonable to say for humans that we should be checking in at least 6 monthly to make sure that our plans are on track.
Definitely. I stopped years ago calling it calling it a financial plan and calling it a financial roadmap, because in my mind, the financial plan was this beautiful little document with charts and graphs and all that stuff that we put in a beautiful leather binder and we give to the client, and then the client puts it on their bookshelf and never looks at it again. And to me, I always used, and I don't know if you remember, the AAA used to have the trip tickets when you would go on vacation. You remember those, Jen, at all?
No, actually, I don't.
I'm probably older than you, so yeah. But yeah, the trip. So
I haven't been. I just haven't been there for 20, 30 years.
Wow, that's exactly right. Yeah. So yeah, when I was a kid, we'd go to the beach or go to the shore. My dad would go to AAA, and he would get this booklet, and it was called the trip ticket, and they were maps. And so what they would do is then they would highlight the routes on there, and like if they knew where construction was, they would stamp construction zone. This is before GPS.
I was just going to say that's like the early version, right?
It really was, yeah. And you'd kind of flip through the book. I said the beauty of that map is that, again, you're kind of looking at it and you're kind of flipping through, but you could, if you came across, like, let's say some construction that they didn't know about, or a road closure, an accident, you could look at the map and say, we can reroute here. So you kind of know, you always know your beginning point, where you want to go, but the road map then allows you to see the whole picture and be able to make adjustments to get to that endpoint. So that's why I like to call it financial road mapping.
Yeah,
totally. It's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think one thing I've started to explain, I don't have a nice metaphor for it, but this idea of starting at, there we call it like 30,000, 100,000 feet of like, what do you want? And then you have that as a sort of North Star, as a metaphor. It's something that you keep as your focus area to know if you're on track, because sometimes what's going to happen is you have to take a step, and until you make that one step, the next step might not appear. And that's hard for people because they're thinking planning sounds so concrete, and it can be because we can model. But at the same time, you still have to, there's a lot more information that comes in. You're just saying with that GPS. Well, the nice thing about real-time GPS is that if an accident just came up and that sort of roadblock is there, that system is going to tell you, well, that's the same idea as the real-time planning. Does that make, so you take that step and you go, oh, this new information just came into me. Either, and one of my mentors said, change comes from one or two places. It either comes from inside you, or it comes from an external source, but it doesn't come from anywhere else. So you could make a decision that roadblock could be you saying, I don't want that anymore. I've been thinking about it. I really want this other thing. Or like, it's just a rule change, tax laws change, and you go, oh, no. Well, so regardless of whatever that source is, you have to iterate, and that's the key point. So yeah, we actually call our plans life and wealth achievement plans now.
Oh, that's great, yeah.
Yeah, but it's the same. The methodology is the same. It's set out the target and iterate your way to the target.
Well,
bluntly.
Exactly. Well, you know what, Jen, you and I, we could go on forever. And I think next time we'll have this discussion, let's do it over some port and chocolate.
Sounds...
her husband Jeff taught me all about how to drink ruby port and chocolate. And it's a beautiful thing. So
yes, it is.
But, just in closing, so tell us a little bit about if people want to get in touch with you, how they would get in touch with you, and also where they could get your book, Financial Planning for Global Living.
Sure. Yeah. The book is on, you can get it anywhere. Frankly, you can get it on Amazon. Right. You can get it on IndieBound or any of the online bookstores, basically. And I'm at Patterson Partners Ltd.com if you want to look up the website. But you can also, frankly, I'm on LinkedIn. You can come through social. We're working on our social strategy at the moment, but that's the easiest way. It's come through the book. The book actually is a nice place to start. Frankly, it has a lot of what we talked about, the issues, how to kind of approach it from a high level, and it has some of the rules, which is very handy. If you're just trying to understand, get a baseline idea of some of those things that might change. It's for Americans who, if you have anything international, it's kind of how do those international issues start arising. So,
Perfect. Eric, anything from you?
This is great information. My parents actually retired to Costa Rica for a number of years, and then they missed the States. They missed their grandkids, so they came back. But it was an amazing adventure for them, and there was definitely challenges. It was interesting to listen to this podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
No problem.
It's my pleasure.
No problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jenna. I really appreciate it. And like I said, Jen and I can go on for hours and hours. So I would recommend get her book. That's a good top view, but everybody's personal situation is different, and that's where personalized advice really comes in handy. Use the book as kind of to give you a top line, some background, and then feel free to contact Jen, or if you need to get in touch with me, I can always get you in touch with Jen. And you can always do that at podcast@highliftfin.com, or you can go to our website, highliftfinancial.com, and just click on Let's Chat, and we can just schedule a time to have a conversation. And with that, and the last thank you I want to send out goes out to the listening audience. And so thank you so much for tuning in and listening to Your Business, Your Life with me, Matt DiFrancesco. And if you're not yet subscribed to the podcast yet, please click on the subscribe now button below. So this way, when I come out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device, and it'll make it much easier for you to share it with your friends and family. So again, thank you so much for listening. And from me and everyone at High Lift Financial, make it your best day every day. And we'll see you again next time. Take care and God bless. Hey, I really want to thank you for listening to the Your Business, Your Life podcast. If you want to be notified when new episodes become available, click the subscribe button below.
The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of High Lift Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investment, legal, or tax advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified professional with any questions you may have regarding your business or personal planning. DiFrancesco Financial Concierge, LLC, DBA High Lift Financial, is a registered investment advisor. Registration with the United States Securities and Exchange Commission or any state security authority does not imply a certain level of skill or training.